Good morning, and you're very welcome to this episode of Enterprise University. We are now nearly at the end of the journey with all 10 lessons. We are now on to lesson 9 today on expenses. So thank you for joining me today. I can see we've got some people just coming in there now into the lesson. Super. Well, you're very welcome. And I will share with you exactly what it is that we will cover off today as part of the expenses lesson. As always, just a little bit of housekeeping. This lesson, of course, will be recorded and will be made available on our website in the resources page for the Enterprise University. So do check out all the previous lessons if you've happened to miss any particular one that's relevant to your particular role, or if you want to get an overview of exactly how to utilize a new feature or function within the platform. It's always there and available for you. So here we are at Module 9, and it's been quite the journey since last October, just looking at all the modules that we've covered off to date. And we've now reached Module 9 on expenses. So let's dive in and take a look at what we will cover off today. So in today's lesson, we will do a quick recap on Module 8. We will take a look at the expenses overview, what exactly expenditure will give you, and the value will give to you as an organization, and certainly within the finance role as well, particularly to control spend management. We will look at how to set up expenses, mileage rates, and expense users. So all the different elements that can make it easy to manage and add expenditure and, of course, mileage to the system for all the different users. And these could be people that are simply never in the office, they're out on the road. How do I track all the expenditure from parking, meals, flights, accommodation, etc.? All of those key factors that need to be tracked within the platform. We will look at setting up the expense items, and I think I've mentioned those there already. So expense items really are under the receipts heading, such as meals, accommodation, flights, parking, whatever it is that you are compensating your employees for in terms of expenses. So they're all the different expense items. And of course, mileage is an expense item. We will look at, of course, the financial impact. So how this will impact your GL accounts. So ultimately, when an expense is put through the system, and once that's been approved, when it gets submitted, what happens on the financial side? So that's important as well to understand the flow. The process itself to add an expense, approve an expense, and then ultimately post that expense to your procurement ledger and, of course, your financial ledger, your accounting, are 3 very simple steps in order to do that. So I'll bring the full picture together throughout the lesson this morning. As always, we have a live demonstration, and today I'm going mobile, so we'll be on the mobile expense app where you can easily see how users in the field, those that are on the road, that are out there with the clients, that are perhaps jumping from country to country, need access to recording those receipts, putting in the mileage, just to ensure that they get paid on time, for example, at the end of the month as part of their salary as well. So what we'll do now is we'll just do a quick recap on Module 8. So if you missed everything on Module 8, it was all around production. It's quite a detailed lesson, all around the production, the settings that were required, the production process, adding those production orders into the system, what it meant in terms of ensuring you had sufficient stock for the production run itself. So we looked at the MRP for bulk reordering of raw materials, but also for the creation of production orders from the BOM items or the bill of materials or the final product, whatever terminology that you're familiar with and relate to. We also looked at planning for production, so the resource scheduler, how you could plan that against your users or root users. So whether that your root user was in fact a piece of machinery within your warehouse, that's used for production, that you could plan in the time for those production orders in that particular area. We looked at how you could assign production orders to be picked. And of course, the basis of that is ultimately that will lead to is a whole picking process. That is something, and I did mention it on the last lesson, that we are already in the process of developing a whole workflow around in terms of the picking process as well. We also looked at production day, making that final product, receipting in the final product itself, and then back flushing or issuing out the components. And of course, tracking the production items, how you could track them, where you could report on them, and so much more. So do take a look at the recording. It's available already on the website in enterpryze.com. Click on the resources tab and then into Enterprise University and you'll get access to that. Okay, more importantly, back to today's lesson. So spend management. Spend management in terms of enterprise and what we look at in terms of being able to control all the spend. So looking at some of the areas that we've looked at to date in terms of purchasing, looked at stock, we've looked at banking, and of course today we're going to focus in on expenses. So ways of streamlining your process to record those expenses so that when you do have somebody out in the field or they're going out on site, or perhaps you've got an engineer that needs to do call outs every month, that you can record all of the relevant information such as mileage, such as travel, whether that's parking for parking meters, for parking or for car parks, or whatever it is that you've agreed with your employees to reimburse on expenses. But the great thing here is being able to track those through the platform. It means that you can define who those users are, those users that can add an expense or add a mileage, because not everybody can. You can assign the approver or approvers that are required for those expenditures. You can define, for example, the GL account code that expenditure will hit. Or if there is a specific one for the employee, you can define that as well. In terms of the reimbursement side, we will look at where you will have to define a supplier account and link that to your expense user. And of course, the whole idea there is that the invoice will post to that particular supplier account, and that's through that account is where you will process your outgoing payment in order to reimburse the employee. So lots of ways of controlling that spend. And obviously, as you can hear already that the way I've described an invoice going through, so we've got a financial impact on the GL accounts. With the bank and the payments, we've also got a financial impact. So we've got money leaving the bank account, and of course that's going to have a financial implication. But this is all automated. Once the settings are applied once to the employee and the expense user, it just seamlessly follows through. The only thing you might have to change might be if for any reason, if the user is no longer active and you need to take them out. Of course, for historical purposes, they have to stay, for audit purposes, they would have to stay within the system, but you can take the user out at, prevent them from logging into the system, but they will remain there under the expense users for audit purposes anyway. You can, of course, again, looking at this from a higher level, you can, of course, track expenses by cost centers and project codes. So that's important to know as well before you implement this into the system. In addition to that, you will hear me refer to maybe a couple of localization pieces as well throughout the lesson. In particular, we have some direct features in place for the Irish localization, and that would be the E/or report, and of course the subsistence expenses that you can also add within the system. So without further ado, let's focus in now on expenses, and let's take a look at the overview of what it is that we can do with expenses. So expenses can be added either on the mobile or on the web. So we can do it through the standard platform on the web application, or you can add them in on the field through the mobile app. And you'll see that during my demonstration. It's really simple and easy to use. You can define expense users and approvers. So you define your users as expense users under the user settings, and you can also define if that user is an approver or not an approver. So that's important, and we'll see that again as part of your user setting setup. Mileage rates. You can define mileage rates at company or user level, or both. So if you have the user level mileage rate will be used above the organization rate, because you might have defined a user rate specific to maybe 1 or 2 users, and everybody else will use the organization rates. So you can define what those mileage rates will look like, and of course you can choose between whether it's kilometers or miles, so whatever you need to record that as. Expense items. So there is a predefined table of expense items. Some examples here, of course, are mileage, travel, meals, subsistence, which I mentioned in relation to the Irish localization as a requirement, and of course lots of other options: parking, overnight accommodation, flights, all of the above, lunch, meals, whatever you need, whatever it is that you need to record as an expense type, you can add that into the system under the expense settings. Mileage itself generally only exists once as one type of expense, because that's how it's added into the system. And of course, last but not least, and I've mentioned this as well from the very outset, because this is important as part of your control on spend, is the automatic postings to the GLs. So I mentioned already that when you define your expense items, so the step prior to that, you will have a GL account defined against that particular expense item. Alternatively, you can define a GL account against your expense user. And very simply what that means is that that GL account will be used at the time that the expense is submitted and posted then to the procurement module. So it's automatic postings to the GLs for all the different expense types. And of course, as I've mentioned already, you can capture those by cost center and projects for further analysis within the accounting module. So what does adding an expense look like? So very simply, as we said on the previous slide there, they can be added through the web or mobile, so it's flexible. What is it that you need to do? Are those persons recording expenses mainly in the office? Then they can use the web app, or if they're on the road, or if they happen to maybe only go out once or twice a month, they can have the app installed on their mobile phone, so at least then it's available to them to record the expense on the go. So of course, the expense app is available for iOS and Android. So when you capture on the app, you can get notified, and as an approver, you'll get a notification, and then of course you can approve that receipt. The approver can also use the mobile app for approvals, or can use the web app. So it really is a very flexible way of managing expenses. In terms of reporting further on those expenses, of course, the web app is better to give you all of the the information that you require, with a full history and the statuses of all of those expenses. We've already mentioned that we've got automatic postings to the GL. We can see that there again on the cost centers and projects. And of course, records can be held, excuse me, in foreign currency. And of course, you can capture images. So images of the receipts. And of course, you can report on same. Now, what we've done there with regards to the images, for example, on the receipts or the mileage, whatever you need to record it against, you can make those mandatory. So if it's a case that you don't want any end user recording an expense without having a copy of the receipt that they received from the car park or whatever it is, you can make that mandatory. Now, the mandatory piece works directly on the web application. So if you need mandatory receipts, it's through the web. The mandatory piece doesn't come through to the mobile, but they can add the receipt through the mobile, but you can just instill that as part of the workflows as well. So here's an example here, just even to show you that the screen is different when we look at it here in terms of adding it through the mobile app itself. It's very simple. You can see there how to add it through. We've mentioned already mileage rates can be at organization or employee level. You can even record the the size of the engine for the employee, for the end user, particularly where it's somebody that's out on the road, and that's done as part of the engine capacity. So we do have another rates table that we don't recommend you use unless this is something that you absolutely need to record. And that is, you can have, in addition to the organization rates, when you switch on the engine capacity rates, what you're saying there is that, and generally this is another, again, this is where this has come into place in terms of a localization requirement here within Ireland for public servants. If the size of the engine, for example, is, let's say, 1.8 litre, you might have a particular rate for that particular engine capacity. So the rates might reduce. The higher the engine, it might reduce, or maybe it might increase because, of course, depending on the mileage overall for the users. So you can define separate rates based on engine capacity. So the engine capacity table is giving you the ranges of the engine sizes. And then on the main rates table, it will show you those, and then you just populate the rates to go with those. I won't go into that in too much detail. That is something I would suggest you don't ultimately switch on unless you absolutely need it, and certainly have a conversation with support in advance of switching it on. You can see here, even on the mobile app, you can see we can specify the project, use your location. So if you've got maps, of course, enable those on the phone, works great. Obviously, if you're doing it through the web application, you're telling it where you're traveling from and to. The foreign currency piece, absolutely. So if you've got employees in different countries, maybe you have an engineer that's in France looking after the French customers, and they're, going around. So they're obviously, that's obviously euro, that's different, that's okay, that's fine. But maybe outside of the EU or US dollars, for example, that you can record the different currencies where necessary. You always have to have a purpose for the travel, a purpose for the expense, a purpose for the mileage. That always has to exist against every expense entry that goes into the system. So the purpose is mandatory, to make sure that it is mandatory. An employee can specify whether to reclaim by employee or by company. So by company means that maybe there's an employee that has a credit card, a company credit card, and you want to record all the expenditures, excuse me, that are coming through as a result of the company credit card. So that's just flagging it, really, just to say you're not making credit card payments per se. What it is you're just saying that it's the credit card that's to be the balance on the credit card that needs to get reduced down, and not the employee to be reimbursed. That's the difference. So when it's paid by me, that means I am reclaiming the expense. I want to be paid back the money for the travel or the money for the parking. And of course, a key piece with being mobile as well is that you can save it as a draft. So if you're out of coverage, for example, you can record the expense or mileage and save it as a draft. And then once you're back online again and in coverage, that you can synchronize and upload that then to the web app, or for your manager, line manager, etc., to follow through and approve that for you. So lots of different things that you can do there. And you can see here that, again, with adding the receipt, very similar, exactly what I said there in terms of being able to select. The very first thing you would do there is record an image of the receipt itself. Select what it is. So that's the expense type. What is it for? Is it for meals, travel? Is it for accommodation, etc.? All of the above. So select what it's for. You've got your date. You've got potentially linking it to the project. Again, there is an automation piece as well with scanning the receipt to automatically populate the screen. It can scan a certain amount of information, such as the date and the amount, and it can automatically scan that for you onto the mobile app. Again, we've got the currency options. Locations, of course, it works perfectly on when you're on the phone. On the web app, you just have to populate the information. Again, you can store the images and receipts and make those mandatory, particularly on the web app, to ensure that if somebody's populating an expense, that you have the information that you need in order to review and approve. Again, you can select whether it's paid by me, so if I want to be reimbursed, or it's through the company credit card, and of course, save as a draft when you're offline and out of coverage on the mobile app. So lots of flexibility there. around it in terms of being able to, work offline, particularly when you're on the mobile app. And the same as well in the system. When you add in an expense, it goes in as a draft, and until the approver proves it, it stays there. So it can be updated and changed as needed. This is the automation piece I mentioned, and you can see it there just on the mobile app, that when you hit the plus to add an image, there's an option there to camera data scan. And really all it's doing is it's just populating certain fields, which is generally the date and the value on that receipt, if it's able to read it at the time. So I do have a receipt here, obviously for the purpose of today's demonstration. So we'll see if it's going to be able to read in the amount. I have a habit of not keeping receipts, probably like most of us these days. I'm trying to reduce the old paper trail in the pocket, and of course for the greater good of not filling a bin as well. So let's have a look. So simply, how does this work? When it's attached, obviously as an image, it's stored as a PDF or an image file. So when adding the expense, it automatically then syncs back to the web application, and then we can see it online, and the approver can also see the receipt. That's the important part. So we'll see that when we do the live piece later on. So next on to the important part, let's have a look at the setup. What do we need to have in place to make this all work? So your expense approvers. So we go into settings, we go into user settings. So where you have the little edit button on above your name there. So this is for our admin users. So we click on edit and we go into the permissions here for Sharon, and you can see here there is a toggle button to say whether or not you are an expense approver. So it's as simple as that. You switch on or off as to whether you will be able to manage approval of expenses. So this is important for all the departmental heads, line managers, etc. So this is where you can assign the expense approver. So lots of flexibility around that, because even though as an expense approver signed to an expense user, there's flexibility around that as well when you're doing those approvals. So for example, when you go on holidays and you're going to be away from the desk for quite some time, you need somebody else to step in and look after your approvals. So there's lots of options around that. So let's take a look here at the expense users. So we come in here to settings, we go into expense settings. And under expense users, there's a plus sign here, and you simply click here to start adding your new expense users. And you can see here what happens, that on the left-hand side, starting with the very first column, you can see their expense user. So this will be a list of all the users that are currently licensed to use the platform at present. So you select the user. Then you select the payment type. Will they be company paid or employee paid? So generally most are employee paid, but I would suggest putting both in place. So at least they're there as an option. The next option, of course, is the supplier account. Well, how is the invoice, or where is the invoice going to go for that employee to be reimbursed? So that is the supplier account. So whether that's a supplier account that you define per employee, or you might decide to have one supplier account for all employees. For audit purposes, I probably would recommend one for each one, because then you can clearly track all the invoices and payments going in and out of those accounts. It does make it easier to control. The authorizer. So this is the approver that we saw in the previous tab. Who is the authorizer for the expense? Next column there you can see is the GL code. So I mentioned already for the automated GL postings, it will take it from the expense item first. But if a GL account code exists for an employee, you can specify that here now. Next up we have PPSN and employment number. Now, both of those fields are specific to the Irish localization, and that is why they are there. And I will show you that towards the end before the demonstration, what they actually relate to, so you don't have to consider those. So that's the public services number and the actual employee's employment number, for example, on the payroll system. Next up, we have the engine size. So remember I mentioned about the 1.8 litre, so there you go, 1800, there's an example. And if you want to capture this employee's expenses under a specific department or cost center, this is the opportunity to do it now. So this is where you specify that cost center relates to that employee. So for example, they might be within a specific department in a particular region, and you want to make sure that that is captured correctly when it comes through to the financial reporting. Next up then we have, you can't see the full column, but actually it is the distance rate. So I mentioned about rates being stored at organization level and employee level. So if it is stored at employee level, this is where you specify the distance rate. So this means that this will be the rate used for every mileage expense captured for this particular employee. If this remains blank, it will always use the organization rate. So you get to decide. The distance record is simply that. It's a history of the miles traveled or kilometers, depending on what you've defined at organization level. This is something that automatically increments as you start to add mileage expenses into the system for this particular employee. And of course, there you can see there we can delete a line, we can edit that information. There is a filter report on the grid as well, because if you wanted to do an analysis of the grid to see, particularly if you have quite a large list of expense users, there is the 3 dots elliptical menu there to add other columns on. So do take a look at what is required around the expense users. So this moves us on obviously appropriately to the mileage rates, because we saw there we could assign a mileage rate to the user themselves. However, we can do this at organization level. So initial settings, again, we're into the settings menu, back into expense settings, and at the very top of the screen here, let's just have a look at all of the options that can be enabled, disabled. So this is where you can enforce mandatory attachments to ensure that receipts and photographs, etc., are captured. Mandatory purpose, you need to know why they're looking to be paid for travel, accommodation. Why? Where were you? So the purpose really has to give you that information. So attended customer event in Dublin Hotel on these dates, blah, 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 whatever it is. So that's to give you whatever it is that you agreed in terms of your workflow, what the employee needs to record. And that's important information in order for you to make an informed decision on approving the expense. There's an option here to reclaim tax on expenses. So this is applicable in some countries. You can reclaim tax on expenses. So the tax rate can be set by the expense type. So the expense type is the meals, the travel, the parking, etc. And the tax element will automatically be added then to your tax return. Okay, so if you need to reclaim tax on expenses, this is the option that you have to enable. Expense scanning. Do you want that enabled or disabled? And that's the piece I mentioned on the mobile phone where you went to camera scan to scan those receipts. Do you want that to record that? And obviously, because it's an automation piece, you can see there you've got a number of credits as well that have to be, which is billed per receipt. So your credits and remaining balance will be displayed here if that's enabled for your organization. Next down we have mileage distance unit. Is it kilometers? Is it miles? Simple as that. Do you want your users, this is your expense users, this is the next option, to change the tax on expenses? So if you have allocated a tax rate to, for example, your mileage, or not your, well, mileage, or in particular the expense types like meals and travel, etc. Do you want to allow your expense users then to change the tax on the expenses from the default where tax can be reclaimed? Do you want them changing that tax code? So make that decision very, very, very early on. So all of those are explained there with all the different info buttons, so you can make an informed decision of which of those applies to your organization. Then the mileage rates on the organization itself, very straightforward. Here we have enter the mileage limits for each rate. So when you click on the plus sign to add a row, so let's say, for example, you might decide, well, overall for the organization, from 0 kilometers to 10,000 kilometers, the rate will be. Then you might have a second line that goes from 10,001 kilometers to infinity, the rate may be. Or you might have that between 10,001 and 20,000 and so on. So you can define the structure that you need to control what rates are used and when they're used. So that all comes into play with the distance traveled that we saw, the distance record on each of the employees. That's what it compares it against. That's what it's looking for against the threshold, okay, to understand and to make sure that it uses the correct mileage rate for that particular expense user. Next up then we have, you can see here just a great example of what I mentioned there. So from 0 to 5,000, let's say that's 5,000 kilometers, that could be miles, whatever you've defined as being kilometers and miles, the rate is going to be 65 cents. So the 0.65 is 65 cents for euros purposes. 5,001 to 10,000, it'll be 0.51. You can see there the rate is going down the more the mileage they're doing because, you know, they're traveling a lot of miles. They're still getting, you know, still getting the relevant money. And then if I want to cap that, you can see what I've done there on the third line from 10,001, which means to infinity and beyond. The rate will always be 0.45 cents or 45 cents per mile or per kilometer, whatever the case is, whatever you've defined it as. So in terms of the engine capacities, I've put this in here. I don't want to confuse you because I would recommend the previous two slides in terms of just managing your mileage rates for the organization. This, as I've mentioned at the very start, is an extra step. This is something particularly relevant to our public servants here in Ireland, where they have a structured requirement around the different engine sizes on a car that dictate the mileage rates to be, they determine, I suppose, the mileage rates to be used and paid out to employees, depending on the car size or the car engine size. So really what we're doing here in the engine capacity steps is putting in the size ranges. So that would be from 0, let's say 0 to 1400. So 1.4 litre, okay? So 0 to 1400, save. And then from 1401 to 1800, save. So all I'm doing is specifying engine sizes. So you can see here, what does it do? So when you define a series of engine sizes, the original mileage rate table changes. And you can see here what happens now on the threshold. So the mileage rate, which is the middle piece that we saw, just a rate, we saw, remember, 0.65, 0.55, and 0.45. I think there were the three rates. Now what happens is, under the mileage rate section, I get additional columns. And what I've done is, not that there's a 500cc, could be a bike maybe, but just to give you an idea of the ranges of engine sizes. So from 0 to 500, the rate will be 25 cents. 501 to 1050, the rate will be 15. But you can see there, the mileage, the engine size is relevant to the expense user, but they still have to adhere to the threshold, the distance traveled. Okay, so don't confuse that with the overall mileage rates required for your organization. This is just an additional level, an additional piece of distributing mileage rates, again, based on car engine sizes. Okay, expense items. So very simply, usually as a new customer, you get a predefined list of what those expense items are. Some great examples here: mileage, travel, meals, accommodation, parking, whatever it is that you need to record in the organization. So again, we're back into settings, back into expense settings, and this is where you can define those expense types. Again, we have the plus button here. You can see here the first column defines whether it's an expense or a mileage. Mileage generally only exists as one line. I did mention that from the very outset. You generally only need one mileage, just one mileage defined there. And then everything else then is defined as an expense. The code is automatic. That's not something that you decide, except the description you can apply that manually yourself. There can be, as I've mentioned already, subsistence expenses, again, for the Irish localization, just to mention that they are there, and that's why you're seeing them on screen. So we can obviously allocate an expense to its own project code, VAT code. If for any reason there was an element of expenditure, particularly if you've got an employee in another country, if there was possibility of exempt VAT. We've got the E or category, the E or subcategory. Those two columns are specific to the Irish localization, which is a report required by revenue to submit all the travel and subsistence. It has to be specifically categorized in order for that report to be returned to the revenue. So that's what those two additional columns are for. Then we have the GL code that I mentioned. So this is where the automatic postings come into play against the expense type. And of course, we can allocate a cost center as well to the expense type. But I did mention the default for the GL account postings is taken from the expense type. But if you put a GL account code against an expense user, that's the one that will overwrite the expense type. The same with the cost center. Cost centers are generally allocated at the expense type level, but you can select them, as we saw previously, against the expense user as well. Okay, so this brings us back to, this is where I'm mentioning about the GL account codes, the automatic postings to the GLs. What is that going to look like? Well, very simply, how does it affect the general ledger? When you approve those expenses, they then go through to another panel or another grid for expense postings. And this is where generally somebody from finance or procurement is at this point will take a look at what's been approved. They will review the entries. They will make sure that they are correct. They've got the tax rates, etc. They will review them, or if it's not necessary to review, they can go in and simply submit those or post them. Now, they can do them one by one, or they can do multiple postings all at once. So what does it do? It posts a service purchase invoice. Okay, so it's a full purchase service invoice, taking the value from the expense, which is the P&L, and posting to the supplier account as we would expect on your balance sheet. So this is where I've mentioned your general ledger account codes are normally to your expense types, unless you've defined them against your expense users. That's the GL account code it's going to take. Cost centers will be taken into consideration, as they would be on any standard purchase invoice. Project codes as well. And of course, we defined a supplier account against our expense users. So that's where it's going to post the expenses to a creditor account, a supplier account. And again, to make reimbursement easier to track and trace it through for the purpose of payments leaving the bank account as well. So just a quick overview of what that will mean from the automatic postings. So overall, what happens with expenses? Three very, very simple steps. Just bring the picture here together for you now. So number one, we add the mileage and receipt, and now they're there waiting to be approved. Number two, we approve the expense, review it and approve it, or reject it if you need to reject it. And in both instances, in terms of approval and rejection, there are notifications being sent, of course, to the expense user, but there are also notifications being sent to the expense approver. Then we have the postings element of it, which is posting the expense, submitting that then to the procurement. So that's where we have the financial postings. So the purchase invoice is added. And of course, ultimately then, if you go on to pay the employee, that is going to have a financial impact, of course, on the creditor's control on the balance sheet and the bank account as well. And of course, that will update the creditor account as well. So nice and simple how it processes through the system. And last but not least, I mentioned this throughout as we looked at the expense user panel and the expense types as well, the E or enhanced reporting requirements for Ireland. This is something that we have in place since 2024. And you saw that where you could define the PPSN and employee ID number for each employee that's been paid. And so, for example, that was in settings, and expense users. The prerequisites are that you have to have the employee number as well in the organization settings, because that's required for the output file. And then as well as that, the third option there for each expense type, which we saw the 2 columns, the E or category and travel and subsistence subcategory. They are both a predefined list. So you can simply just click on the drop down and select the one that's relevant, and select what's relevant to, first of all, your expense users, and define those that are relevant then against the expense type as well, all within the expense settings. We've a full, the full process is available actually on our help center around utilising the ERR for those. I'm sure if you're not new to it, you're already using it, but if you decide to start using the expenditure, we do have this in place, so it's important just to let you know that it is available. Okay, and now we're on to the live release, or the live demonstration. So as I've mentioned, I'm going mobile, so just bear with me 1 second, and I'll just make sure that this is still, yeah. Fantastic. Just bear with me now 1 second. Okay, as you can see there, I'm just getting set up. So just give me 1 second now, and there we go. So here we have, I'm just going to make sure, I'm just going to share my screen, just make sure that you are seeing this. So just bear with me 1 second. Share, and I'm just going to go to the application window. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to pop that out so you can just see that in full screen view. So you should be now looking at the mobile application. And very simply, what I'm going to do is going to show you around the mobile app and what you can do. And then we're going to jump back in to the web application to show you where all this information also resides within the web app itself. So I'm here just on a very simple organization, and I can clearly see once I land and log into the organization itself, I can see any current expenses that are outstanding. So this is expenses in the current month. So we can see there's €50, one expense outstanding. I can see previously we had approved expenses for this user back in February of €21. So I just get a little bit of an analysis as an expense user when I log into the system to see exactly what expenses have been added. Down the bottom of the screen there, you can see there's various options there to tap on. So there's one there called outstanding. And of course, that's just letting me know that that's outstanding. It hasn't yet been approved. And of course, if I want to view the information on that as the expense user, because I've added that into the system, I can pop in here and I can see, oh yeah, that's the one for petrol. I'm still waiting on that €50. Oh yeah, that was in the car park. Look, you can see there's the purpose, traveled customer event. So just populated that in. And in fact, I can tap in also to see their receipt. This is just a copy of a random receipt just to show you that you can tap in to see, well, did I put the right receipt in there? Has it got the right information? Have I put in, for example, that it is for petrol, the right date, etc. So I can check all that information. You can see there at the very top, I can delete that receipt. So I've decided, well, actually that's wrong. I need to start again. I can do that. I can also email that receipt on as well. And don't forget, the approver will be able to review it further as well with you, or if you need to let them know of any changes. In the history tab here, I can go along to see up to date what's been approved for me or for this user, what's been rejected, nothing rejected so far, but what has been approved. So we know that February had an expense that's already been paid out. I can actually tap into that to see the what was approved at the time. Now, you can see in this particular instance, it was added on the mobile because it didn't force me to capture an image at the time. I didn't pop one in. That's okay. But you can see there it was approved, what it was for. And of course, I can see the purpose I put in at the time was just for a meeting, which took place in Dublin. And of course, I need to be reimbursed the payment coverage is for employee. Moving on down at the bottom, so I did mention about the expense mobile being offline, or can be offline. So we have a drafts tab as well. This is at the very bottom of the pencil icon. So if for any reason your expense user is out of coverage and offline, they can record all of their expenses. They will sit here under drafts, and then when they're ready, they can submit them once they're back in coverage again. Now, another key piece here, because I have defined myself as well as an approver. So under normal circumstances for ordinary users, this would stop here as far as the drafts. This next tab, which is review, can only be seen by those users that have been defined as an approver. So not only can I see, so there's two different users here that I actually have set to be, I'm an approver for. So myself and another Sharon M, just to give you an idea that I could be an approver of multiple users. And I can come in here to review each and every one of those approvals just on the mobile phone itself. It makes it so easy to manage. So I can come in here and tap in and see, look, there's 2 expenses to approve to a value of 158. I can tap in there. I can review them. I can clearly see by the icons, the car, mileage, simple. And then of course the receipt by the icon. So I can see exactly what needs to be done in terms of, so if I tap in, for example, to that particular expense, you can see what happens at the very bottom of the screen. It asks me, do I want to reject or approve? Now, I can approve that one if I like. For example, I'll just approve that. And I might decide, well, actually, I'm going to have a look at the details. So if I want to have a look, I'm just going to slide this one over because I want to actually review the details before I do anything with it. I want to see what's on the receipt. I want to see what's on the attachment because I am the approver. I want to review that just to make sure I'm happy with it before I actually proceed and approve that as well. Or I can leave it there and then review it again, maybe on the web app once I'm back in the office. Well, let's go back a step. Let's add something new in for this particular user for February. So let's do a receipt. So very simply here at the top right, tap the plus sign. And you can see there we've got an option for receipt or mileage. Tap on receipt. Now, the sun is shining there. So let me just see if this is going to come up okay or not. So as you can see here on the screen, ordinarily, the information that we can record against a receipt. So I can specify what the type is. So these are my list of expense types. I can change the date because, of course, people are putting in receipts and mileage, not necessarily for today. It could be for last week. They're only catching up and putting in the information. Project, if I want to specify the project code. And of course, the amount, the currency, the exchange rate, if it's a foreign currency, will automatically appear, but I can choose the currency in which I want to claim the expense. Location, so whatever that needs to be in terms of city or town. Payment coverage automatically defaults to me, that I want to reclaim the expense. And of course, the purpose, which is down here at the bottom of the screen. So let me just come back up to the very top. Let's start with clicking on the plus sign here for the attachment. And you can see there we have an option to take a photo or camera data scan. Try the camera data scan. The sun is shining here now a little bit. It may or may not work. And I noticed that one of my things is a little bit faded, but look, we'll take it in anyway. Let me just... Okay, and use the photo. Okay, I can see there it's probably struggled because I know the sun is shining on that piece there and then the amount field has blurred out. So it's trying to define what the titles of each of those fields are. I've imported ones before and they've come in no problem. So, you know, once you have a nice clean receipt, keep them clean if you're using the data scan for those, it works great. So let's just select, let's just say it's for parking, which in fact it is. We can specify the date. Let me leave it at today's date. Does it relate to a project or not? If the list of projects are there, you can select it. Maybe you've got an engineer that's out on site all the time in relation to a particular project. We can specify the amount, which in this case was 1950. So let's just do that. The currency I'm going to obviously leave as euro. Location. So what I can do here is just put in, I'm just going to put in Dublin. Okay, and then country. Now, don't forget you're on your mobile phone. Obviously for data privacy, I have switched off my location. So ordinarily, of course, this is your phone. It's going to pick up your current location. So if that's, look at me typing in that wrong again. If that's what it is, there we go. Done. Okay. And let me just save that. Okay, and done. So you can, of course, use your current location, or you can search for a location on your map, or an error code, zip code, etc. So all of the above. So if you have it, maps enabled on your mobile, of course, this makes it so much easier just to record locations quite easily. Then we have payment is me. Obviously, I can tap there and I can see me or the company, as you mentioned already for the credit card. Customer billable. So if you want to reclaim as well from the customer, you can switch this on to say customer billable. And what it does, it flags against the expense that you can track then through the procurement menu. And we are actually exposing that customer billable flag so that you can pick those up and understand which purchase invoices then need to have a corresponding sales invoice generated on the back of those to make sure that the customer is billed for further. Of course, that's going to be manual, but it just puts a tick box against the expenses it comes in. So let me just put in for the, just let's say, meeting with customer. Just put that in as our purpose. That is important. And what we'll do is we can save a draft. You can see that's down the very, very end of the screen. So that's the one I mentioned about creating the drafts when you're offline, or if you want to just create a draft anyway. Otherwise, we can click on submit, submit that expense. And do you want to send a notification email to the approver? Send, so that they get the notification. And you can see straight away the analysis or the analyze screen has already updated. The outstanding now increased to 2 expenses for this month, and the value has increased to 69.50. And if we go down here, because again, I am the approver, if we come down here to the review, I can see there that there's, what I need to do actually is probably just do a quick synchronize. So I'm just going to do a quick synchronize here, and that's through the settings menu. That's something I should have showed you there from the very outset, that even on the settings menu up here on the top left above analyze, you get to specify what expenses to display, what organization you're in, if there's a default date, i.e. you want today's date, automatically remove drafts, interval for synchronization if you wanted to synchronize every couple of hours, or you can just hit the synchronize button to automatically update. So now when I go to review as the approver, the second one there has increased to 2 expenses, and I can obviously approve those from there. Okay, I'm now going to quickly jump out of the mobile app, and let's quickly just jump on to the web application itself, just to quickly finish this out in terms of the approvals process. So let me just change back over, just so that you can see that this is all automatically happening. So if you can remember what was on the mobile app there in terms of myself, which was 2 expenses to be approved, plus I had 1 expense for another user to approve. So let me share my screen. I'm going to log back in. I'm actually logging back in as Sharon M. So Sharon M is the one that has now 2 expenses. So I'm just going to come back in here to expenses. I'm going to see my expenses. So I'm Sharon M. But what I can also see flashing away up here on the top of the screen, the notification center. So let's take a look at what it's telling me. And it's telling me new expense to be approved. And there was a previous one. and there was the one that was approved and waiting approval. So these, look at all the notifications that have come through in relation to the expenses. So this is me, the approver. I'm being notified that the expense is to be approved. And of course, what will happen is once it has been approved, it should also update the notification center as well. So under my expenses, I can clearly see the 2 receipts that are awaiting approval. This is my $69.50 in total that we saw on the Analyze section on the mobile app. So I can clearly see what those receipts are. I can drill in to review them. I can review them from here. That's fine. It doesn't matter. So from here, I can just click on the receipt number. It gives me a nice little Wise Panel pop-up, just giving me the outline of that particular receipt. I can go, yep, that's what I switched on. Yep, fantastic. Yep, that was for parking. I can see the purpose. I can also see any of the attachments that I added to the receipt at the time. So I can click here on the attachments, and I can click, of course, to open that in a larger screen. And of course, the same with the one that I did here on the scan. So I can drill in to see what that receipt is and what it relates to specifically. So what can I do from here? I can manage these receipts and approvals. I can delete them, etc. But maybe let's just go flash forward to the approvals tab itself. And because I'm an approver of 2 different users, which we saw on the mobile app, you can see here, I've now got 2 tabs, one for Sharon and one for Sharon M. So it's showing me the expenses that are waiting to be approved. So very simply, what I can do is I can take these 2 receipts. I can match them together because I want to make sure that that's also paid as one invoice. I can approve those 2 receipts together. So I could review them from here. I can drill in, as we saw there already. We can drill into the receipt to clarify and check the detail. I can, of course, reject it from here. So let's just approve. Are you sure you want to approve? Okay. And then, of course, the next step, of course, is the expense posting, which is the final piece in order to bring that through for invoicing. So what I'm going to do is, I know that this particular expense user is linked to Allen Industries. I'm going to drill in here to the top one. This is the latest entry. Because I approved the 2 expenses together, it brings the 2 lines into potentially one invoice. So it makes it nice and easy to track. So then I can submit that then as one invoice with the 2 expense entries on it. Otherwise, if I wanted a separate invoice for each expense, I would just approve each one separately. Make sense? So you can see here, these are the 2 lines. I can then come in here, I can review the information, make sure the cost centers are allocated. Has it got the right project code? The tax rates. Is it going to the right GL account code? Because they're the ones that have been picked up as a result of the default set against your expense types. So without further ado, obviously I can edit that, and I can edit any of those lines if I so wish. Okay. And of course, you can see there, I can, at any point in time, I can drill into the receipt just to take a quick look at what it contains. Or if I wanted to view it fully, I can export that into another tab and review the expense fully again. I'm going to submit this because I want you to see what will happen in terms of submission. Oh, the tax group. So there you go. These are things that you have to make sure are correct at the time. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just do a quick update on the tax code, and maybe it hasn't been defined for that particular one. Okay. It hasn't been defined. Okay. Maybe what I might do, just for the purpose of this, just let me grab one that has something on it, and I'll just put it through just for now. Look, it's only a GL account code, but just let me just switch those around just for now. And I might just put that in as flights. I know it's not exactly the same. And maybe try entertainment. Okay. Okay. We'll just leave that one in as 0 as well, just so we can post something through. And let me then just save that. And last but not least, let's just submit that. So it tells you the invoice has been submitted successfully. You can see there the expense posting has gone off the expense list. And if I now go through to procurement, And if I go through to the Invoices tab, I should see the latest invoices. Let me just go to all and all. And maybe what we'll do there as well, we'll clear filters. There we go. And if we also have a look at all and all, there's no other filters set. Just make sure that that has come through. Okay, we should be seeing the service documents. Okay, it's missing all of my invoices there for a second. I might just have to do a quick refresh, but basically you will see a service invoice will come through onto the purchasing menu as a result of the expense posting through the system. Okay, so that brings us to the end of a very fast and quick demonstration. Obviously, I can open the floor if anybody has any questions. So maybe I'll just go back just to check the Q&A and just see if anything has come through. Let me just share the end of the screen here and let's just take a look at the Q&A and see what's come through. Yeah, absolutely no problem. You can watch the recording in the next class 100% of your way. Yeah, that's the great thing here with the Enterprise University is that it's on demand. So to suit you at your own time as well, 100%, no problem. Okay, great. Any further questions? Okay, well, maybe while we're just waiting to see any questions, we can just do a quick recap. We saw it there just even on the live demonstration. I need to check a couple of my items. I don't know what happened with one or two of those. It's typical on live day when things don't show all the way through, but that's okay. You get the idea, and particularly with the mobile app, it's so easy to use, and for engineers on the road, it makes it easy for them to record their expenses on the fly. So all of the different things that we looked at into today's lesson. And what's next? So obviously we'll do a recap on today again, of course, and we will look at everything around reporting. And that's the importance of reporting. And really what starts with reporting is the data. It's the key data. I mean, analyzing anything on any system for anything, any purpose, is only as good as the data that goes into the system. And of course, it goes from the very outset of the university itself, going from the master data. What information did we require, did we set up in order to ensure that the information going forward was captured and recorded and reported correctly. So also how to make the most out of the grids, those filters, using the filters, creating filtered reports, what that can look like as well within each of the different grids. The dashboards, the different dashboards and how to use them. We would have touched on different dashboards throughout. And of course, there's multiple other reporting options as well, directly on screen and of course through the PDF reports menu itself. As always, there will be a full live demonstration. But that's it for today's lesson. There doesn't seem to be any further questions in, and perhaps I've answered them all. And of course, as always, if you need access to any further information, reach out to support, reach out to your account manager. You've got all the recordings on the website, enterpryze.com, under resources for Enterprise University. Check out our blogs, which is in, again, in the website. If you check out our blogs and get access to all the latest releases and all the product tours, and make sure that you're familiar with all the latest updates on the platform. And of course, the Help Centre as well, help.enterpryze.com. Guys, thank you all so very much for joining me here today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next session. Thank you and have a great rest of day. Take care.